ready. And I have the monitoring system up. It's coming. All right, and we are live. Hey, Squirrel, welcome to the
Hey, Vasco.
summit.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
How have you been doing? I hear you spent some time in the US. You're back in the UK, I see.
I have been going back and forth as I often do. I have more and more clients there and surprisingly in Africa, although nobody's brought me to Africa yet. So please bring me to Nigeria, bring me to Kenya. I've got clients there, but they haven't dragged me over there yet.
Yeah, the beauty of remote work and the modern I remember way back when I was still in university. I distinctly remember the experience that it was to have the first voice call over the internet. It was
Oh
like
yes,
living in the future.
it was pretty strange. I was talking to my computer. Then I could see the person. That was even more exciting.
And then the video calls, and now everybody's on Zoom. I mean, even we are on
Almost as
Zoom
if
right now.
everybody got used to it. It's become standard.
Exactly. It's the as the phrase goes that kind of became a cliche over the last few years. It's the new normal.
I'm just waiting for us, and I'm actually waiting for me to get mine, get those Vision Pros from Apple, because I think those are actually the future of work. People are talking about using them for videos, or sorry, for movies and things like that. I think that's kind of interesting, but the thing is, it's an infinite monitor. So there's a huge connection between how much monitor space you have and how productive you are. So we're all going to be walking around with these white things on our foreheads very soon.
I wonder how that will go. Of course, all developers out there, and you're a developer, at least you were in the past.
Oh, yes, I've been writing code for 45 years.
I still write code myself, and it's a
Me
lot of
too.
fun. And I do appreciate the bigger screen real estate.
It makes a huge, huge difference.
Now, if they could just make those things weigh like 30 grams or something.
Apple's working on that. The battery is separate. That's the first step.
Yeah, so it will come, I'm sure. So Squirrel is here with us. So welcome everybody. Welcome to this Product Owner Summit. Squirrel is here with us to talk about a topic that is very close to my heart. Once upon a time, I myself was taking care of requirements management at a project that I was working on. And
Yeah,
his session today is how we've been doing it all wrong.
absolutely.
So we'll dive into that in a second. Let me just remind you that we have also other sessions here on the Product Owner Summit. And later today, the keynote of this morning, David Bland, who's also the author of Testing Business Ideas, a book every product owner should read, in my opinion. He'll be talking about his keynote and, of course, answering your questions in a live session that you can register to. There are limited seats, so go to productownersummit.org. Look for David Bland's live session and register for that. It's a great session, so make sure you have the opportunity to attend. But now let's focus on requirements. Squirrel, let's start at the beginning, shall we? What sparked the initial idea to bring up what I think many people within the Agile community, at least, will consider a lost art of requirements management?
Well, my great frustration at how so many people are wasting so much time writing down gigantic documents full of great detail that is completely wrong. And there's a concept I talk about. I'm not going to try to do screen sharing here, but I'm just going to ask everybody to imagine a slider that goes, one of those old things, Vasco, I'm not sure if you're old enough to remember, on radios, you used to have to move something back and forth physically to
Oh,
choose what
yes.
radio
And
station to
there were
listen to.
like printed numbers you had to
Yeah,
align the needle with.
yeah, to try to line it, you get static if you went the wrong place. So imagine one of those, but turned 45 degrees. And what I've noticed is that an awful lot of people would like to be more productive, just like we were talking about with the Vision Pro, right? You get more screen space, you get more productivity. Well, if you are less controlled, if you are not trying to be as predictable, as other people might want you to be, then you can be more productive because you can explore more, you can try more things. You and I know we write code that as you're writing the code, you discover new things as you go. Well, the tilted slider controls whether you're up here at the productive end, where you're not really constrained, you're not working to a roadmap, you're working in a very flexible and fluid way, like a tiny startup does, right? Two guys in a garage, a little team, they get stuff out really quickly. That's the productive end. The predictable end is like NASA, right? If you're going to launch a rocket, if you're Elon Musk and you want to get to Mars, I hope he stays there when he gets there, but that's another story. If you're Elon Musk and you want to get to Mars, you have to launch it exactly the right microsecond, and you better have the software ready. So you have to be super predictable. You've moved the slider all the way down here. Now there's a reason it's tilted, and it's tilted because there's a force of gravity, and the force of gravity pulls you down toward being more predictable, toward writing more requirements, toward having high-level designs and low-level designs, and high-level backlogs and low-level refinement sessions. I had a client, this is one of the inspirations for this idea, a client had refinements for their refinements. So they'd refine what they were going to refine in the next session. I just couldn't imagine what they were doing and why anybody
I think
continued to work there.
pre-refinement has started to become a thing. I've heard that word many times.
Refinement, what are we going to do? So all of this is because people have a desire for control. That's that force of gravity, and it's pulling them down toward controlling more, being more predictable, being more like NASA. But they don't need to, because almost certainly everyone who's listening here is not building a nuclear plant or a rocket that's going to go to Mars or a medical device that will operate on people. If you are, please don't listen to the rest of this. Go do something else, read David's book, do something else. Because I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the normal people, the 99% of folks who are spending a huge amount of time specifying things that will never actually go live. If they go live, they will not go live anyway, like what you've actually put in the document. So why did you write the document? And I got so frustrated with that I've done a lot of work in my community and my Squirrel Squadron on this topic, and I want to cover that more as we go through it, Vasco.
So one of the things that you talked about as we were preparing this session is how you've suggested your clients to replace the word requirements with requests. Now, how does the change in terminology affect the way teams approach product development and interact with their users?
Well, they're reflecting the truth. So the problem is that we lie to ourselves by saying, number one, that we actually have things that are required, that there is something that we absolutely must have. Now, there are a few things that are like that. Please don't break the law, okay? So, if the law says you must have a pop-up at the bottom of every web page, then let's get a pop-up at the bottom of every web page, even though all of us just click it whenever we see it, right? Let's comply with the law so we don't go to prison. That seems like a good plan. But most things that we do, most of the things in those thick requirements documents have nothing to do with prison. They have nothing to do with moral requirements. The things like you must have password security and don't store your passwords unencrypted. That's a moral requirement for us. Even if our bosses say don't do it, we have to do it because otherwise people will be really, really harmed. That's the only case where you have a real requirement. Everything else is a request. We would like this. It would make our lives better. If we didn't get it, nobody will die.
So what you're saying,
it's a request.
So what you're saying, if I understood correctly, is that a lot of what people call requirements these days are more or less wishes. So are requirements documents these days in practice wish lists?
They're wishes and wish lists, but even more than that, they're wishes for control. Like if I could just specify what Vasco is going to code tomorrow, if I could just make sure I knew exactly what it was, and I nailed it down to the nth degree, I knew how many pixels wide the button would be, then finally I could get reliability. Finally, I would get control. Things would be better. The fact is, none of it gets better when you put that kind of restriction on. And there's a further problem, which is that we believe that we can get that level of control, and in fact, you can't. And there's lots of research and science about that, which I want to make sure to talk about today, Vasco. Because
what do you mean by you can't?
Even if it was a good idea, you can't actually do it.
What do you mean you can't? I mean, there's a whole computer science field called requirements engineering that actually is predicated on the premise that you can.
Yeah, it's based on a lie. Now let me illustrate the lie before I get people coming out to England and crucifying me. So Vasco, I want you to ask this question. I asked it on my forum where I have thousands of tech and non-tech people together, and I'm always talking about one wonderful thing or another. But I asked them, and I'm going to ask you, all of you listening now, I want you, without consulting each other, without looking anything up, tell me the answer to this question. Is a clock a piece of furniture? This is a yes or no question. And I'm going to ask Vasco, because I don't think we have chat and all the people can't jump in. But Vasco, I'm going to ask you to be a proxy. So what is your answer to, is a clock a piece of furniture?
It can be.
Yeah, exactly. So I asked it on the forum, and guess what? I got 50-50 people who said, yes, a clock is a piece of furniture, and they're thinking of maybe a grandfather clock. They're thinking of a kind of statement clock, a big thing on the wall that's somehow part of the room. And a bunch of other people said, no, you're nuts. How could a clock be a piece of furniture? They're thinking of a little thing that kind of sits on your nightstand, or they might even be thinking of your watch. And then there was another group who said, both of you are nuts. It could be, it depends on which kind of clock you're talking about. This is normal for anything that you try to define in this way. And in fact, there's a whole group of scientists, a whole group of psychologists and philosophers and other people who have studied their own field, and their field is the field of concepts. And they wrote a giant book. I mean, this book is really big. I got to give a shout out to Keith Braithwaite, a very clever guy who turned me on to this book. And he said, don't read this book. I actually read it. Don't read this book, because what's in this book is study after study after study, experiment after experiment after experiment, where people ask these kind of questions. Is a clock a piece of furniture? Human beings are not consistent on these points. Human beings will never understand each other when they try to define what a piece of furniture is. Now, you can go to a legal document and you can find sort of legal definitions that are dry and dusty and so on, but people don't follow those. If it might be according to the the safety and health people, that they say you can't put furniture in front of a fire door, and they have some very clear definition of furniture. Human beings are going to say, yeah, I'm going to put my clock in front of the fire door. Tough. They aren't going to pay attention to the law. And that's the point, that the wish to define things so tightly and to get them exactly right in the way you wish you might about clocks and furniture and all the other concepts that are written in this book, where people tried to define precisely what human beings meant by the words they were using, that doesn't work. And it's a very entertaining book to read the last chapter of, because what the authors say is, yeah, we wrote this giant book. We went into all this research for 30, 40, 50 years. And what we've determined is that all of it was a waste. All of it was based on things that cannot be done. And so everybody give up on trying to come up with these concepts and these requirements to get this very firm definition that you can nail down and listen to. The good news is you don't have to do that. There are lots of ways of building software that don't mean you need to have these things nailed down in that way.
So we because our audience today is mostly product owners or people who work with product owners. Let's focus on that.
Who really care about definitions. I'm sorry I'm bringing you bad news here, guys, but
yeah,
I'd rather tell you the truth.
And the big book of concepts, of course, brings quite a few fundamental ideas. I would hasten to say that the philosophers were onto the problem a lot earlier than any social scientist, and of course there's a lot of philosophy just on the idea of a language as a construct, and we could go deeper into that rat hole, but not yet, or rabbit hole I should say, but not yet, maybe a bit later today. So for the product owners and those who work with product owners that are listening to us, what are some of the key takeaways that you took from the big book of concepts?
Well, the main one was stop talking about concepts. Stop trying to nail down what your customer means, and that's why this whole notion of, and now I'm not saying requirements engineers don't have something valuable to do. Just stop calling it requirements engineering, please, because you can't engineer your way out of this confusion. And they tried. They really did. I mean, there's so much material in here. Do not read it because it didn't work. It's good to know that it didn't work. But the point is, you can't sort of build a system that will somehow magically turn stuff in people's heads that is inherently fuzzy and undefined and unclear and make it into something that a computer can understand. The only thing you can do, the only thing that actually works in this complex domain, this is a concept from the Cynefin framework that I know you know, and we can talk about more if you want. In the complex domain where there are no rules like this, where there isn't a clear definition you can write down in a book, The only thing you can do is probe, try something, sense, say, did you like that or not, and respond. Oh, how did that work for you? Let's try another thing. So if you're doing that again and again on a fast cycle, then you don't need the detailed requirements document. You don't need to try to define exactly how many hands the clock has and whether it's 7 centimeters wide or 70. You
So
can define it by showing people a clock and saying, does this meet your timing needs?
So I very much empathize with this argument. I studied computer science, of course, and I started as a programmer, and every programmer learns very quickly that you need to test the stuff you're writing. You know, sooner or later it will bite you, so you might as well start testing as soon as possible. And over time, we develop ideas like unit testing and ultimately test-driven development, so that we wouldn't get into these rabbit holes because we knew in advance that we couldn't know what was going to work until we actually wrote it. But many of us in school, at least those in our generation, Squirrel, for sure, learned
I
about
remember.
requirements engineering and analysis and so on. So there's a lot of us, and I mean in the industry, invested into this idea that concepts really exist and you can really write them down and people can really understand them now and 6 months or even 3 years from now. So what alternatives do you have to propose? So you've talked about the feedback cycle. So let's develop that further. How do we bring that concept of the feedback cycle to the realm of requirements or requests, as you want to call them?
Yep, fantastic. So I'm going to give you loads of examples, and Vasco, you're just going to have to stop me when I do too many or when you have questions. So one of them is a great one from my first company where I was CTO. And what we had was lots of banks who wanted us to do things for them, and lots of hedge funds and people like that, people with more money, more zeros in their bank account than either all of us combined, right? So these are very, very wealthy people. And they have spreadsheets, believe it or not, they were just right there in Excel. They were maintained by much lower paid people who made lots of mistakes in keeping track of how much money they were making on the money that they had. And so they hired us to come along and build them something that was better than the spreadsheet. And they showed us the spreadsheet and we began digging through it. And we said, this cell seems to add this one to that one. That doesn't seem right. And we found lots of mistakes as we went through it. So they said, yeah, that's why we want you to come and fix it. So the interns will stop messing it up and we report the wrong returns to our investors. I said, good, we understand what to do. But what we did not do is go through and figure out what should cell X472 be calculated as. Should it be the sum of this or multiplied by that or something else? We did not start there. What we did instead was we copied, and you guys might remember if you're into spreadsheets a lot, that there's a paste values only. And so that's essentially what we did. So we took their actual spreadsheet with all the actual numbers in it, and we, at a particular moment, and we sucked it out, and we put it into HTML. So we made it into one giant table of fixed numbers. These are numbers that are not changing, unlike the real world, where the stock goes up and the bonds go down and something else happens and your returns change. We didn't do any of that. We just put the raw numbers there. And we showed it to them. And we said, okay, we're now going to do our first feedback cycle. Tell us what you think of this number. So they said, well, this one's obviously wrong. We said, yeah, we got that from your spreadsheet over here. Oh, okay. Well, that seems really important to know. Good. Let's fix that. And then we said, so what should it be? And that was the one we focused on, the one that had already had a mistake on it. So we said, all right, so this one's going to be this one times this one minus this one times the other one. And we changed the system so just one number was now being calculated from all the others. And we showed that to them. And they said, yeah, this one's right, but now this one's wrong. And so, all right, how should that one be calculated? So what we did is we evolved a completely static bunch of numbers into an actual replication of their spreadsheet that did all the calculations correctly and let you update things and press buttons and all the other good stuff. But we did it one step at a time, right in front of the customer. And the big thing that all of the listeners will know this about their domains, but they may not know it about finance. So in finance, literally there are human beings who just have sort of numbers programmed into their brains. I don't know how their brains work, but they sort of are walking spreadsheets. And those folks are the ones who can go at a huge bunch of numbers. That one's wrong. And of course, that's what lets them be really great traders, because they can say, wait, this market has the wrong price. We can make money there. And there are similar people in the world of biotech, for example. They can look at a genome expression and say, this is the wrong, this has been transcribed wrong. There are people in sport who can look at, I'm working with a golf company now, and, they can look at a green and say, this one's a little high, so I should go this way. people have this ability that they cannot capture. We're back to concepts, right? They cannot write this stuff down. They cannot tell you how it works. If they could, they would, and then they would teach other people, and then it wouldn't be this specialist knowledge.
So
But the
you
value is
talked.
you can download that information from them by having this frequent interaction, and by doing that, capture what their process is, which they cannot articulate to you.
And one of the things that I hear you say is that the aspect of collecting feedback in a structured and frequent manner, it's not enough that it's structured, it needs to be frequent, is how we, I'll just say for the ease of word now, replace the whole idea of requirements engineering. It's by having the
Yes,
customer
exactly.
or customer representatives interacting with the teams and constantly iterating on what is being developed. Now, if I hear you correctly, isn't this just what the whole agile idea is all about? I mean, XP, extreme programming,
Yes,
introduced
exactly.
customer in the room way back when.
Precisely. And so that got kind of ossified and twisted into this whole notion of requirements engineering, defining things up front and so on, which is exactly what folks like Kent Beck and all of his friends were fighting against. They were saying, hey, wait, this stuff doesn't work, because they'd read the big book of concepts. They knew that this stuff was not capturable and that they needed frequent interaction. But then that tilted slider came in again with its pernicious desire for control, dragging the slider down toward predictability. Because what you can do, if you say, "Well, I'm going to go through the high level design and then the low level design and then do the estimates and so on," you get this illusion of control. You get this feeling that you're actually doing something,
And it
and that
is
you're
an
following a
illusion.
process, and you're going to get to the outcome. Whereas if you just show numbers to somebody over and over again and keep trying to get them to be better, you may get more and more numbers, but then you discover, hey, wait a minute, actually that whole column is wrong. And so suddenly you're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It does not feel, it doesn't fit into a Gantt chart very well. And so people who really want that level of control are not comfortable with this. Good, because they're wrong. They're basing what they're doing on a misunderstanding fundamentally of how human beings deal with concepts.
I think that there's something that you're saying, at least that's what I hear and interpret from what you're saying, that the search for upfront control is what causes the problems, because that we don't have enough foresight to predict what will happen, and therefore, set up the requirements upfront well enough for them to be significant long enough throughout the project, and therefore the team could execute on them. But on the other side, when I hear you talk about this idea of constant feedback, and we've talked about extreme programming, for example, that cycle, the cycle of deliver something small, get feedback, improve something small, deliver something small, get feedback, improve something small, that cycle is predictable. The frequency can be inbuilt into the way we run the cycle. For example, Scrum has the idea of time boxes. And we can be entirely predictable on when we deliver something and on how we get the feedback. Now, of course, this means that we're going to get feedback, which means that what we actually do in practice will not necessarily be predictable, but will be hopefully much better, right? So now
Exactly.
We're looking at the slider, and then we have a question, Squirrel. Okay, so there's this different types of predictability of what we do or how we do it. And what I hear you say is that control is okay as long as you're pulling it towards the how we work, not what we deliver.
Almost. So I agree with almost all of that, but I have to ask you a very important question, Vasco. Have you ever landed an airplane?
I have not.
Okay, that's fine. Have you ever seen a simulator or maybe played a game where there's a landing of an airplane or anything like that?
No, I work with simulators of cars mostly.
Okay. This one really has to be an airplane. So I'm just going to tell you something that you would know, and folks who are watching and listening might never have actually landed an airplane. I haven't, but you might have seen a simulator, or you might have even just looked into a cockpit, and there's a particular item in there called a glide path indicator. And what the glide path indicator looks like is it's some kind of a light color at the top. It's a circle, and it's got a light color at the top, and it's got a dark color at the bottom, and it's got a little picture of an airplane on it. Guess what? It's telling you where your airplane is, and it's telling whether your airplane is on the path to the runway as you're landing, or if you're just bang on, it'll just be right in the middle. But if it's a little bit high, that means your airplane is high. What does that mean? It means you're going to overshoot the runway. You're going to wind up in the trees. Not a good place. Don't want to do that. Or your airplane's going to be a little bit low. So it's going to be, the indicator will show you you're low. And what that's telling you is you're going to miss, you're going to hit, you're short for the runway. You're going to hit before the runway. That's not good either. There's cars parked there and stuff. Don't want to land there. And the thing that happens if you watch anybody actually land a plane, I've got a video on the forum, for example, of some people landing a very small airplane in a huge crosswind in Scotland. And the thing is up and down all over the place. It's moving left and right, and the winds hit them, and they don't know what's happening, and they have no idea. But they're getting closer and closer to the runway. And every time the pilot is very carefully adjusting based on what the glide path indicator says you're a little high, you're a little low, you're a little left, you're a little right. And so you're always making those adjustments. You're always moving toward the runway. So what I tell clients to do, and I had a wonderful client named Paralego that do textbooks for students. They were having a terrible time with just kind of learning from their environment. And I said, what we're going to do is we're going to run a lot of experiments. Dave Snowden of Cynefin fame would call these probes. So we're going to run a lot of probes, and each probe may succeed or fail, may give us a positive or a negative result. But every one is going to be a success because we will have run the probe, and it'll tell us whether we're too high or too low, or are we on track, or where are we. And if we run enough of those, we're going to be able to tell you how close we get to the ultimate outcome that you want to get to. Are we on track for the runway? So if you're reporting in that way, now this drives people who love Gantt charts bananas. Project managers have to really kind of get a brain transplant to make this work. But once they understand it, people in the business, for example, love it, because you go to marketing and you say, I just ran 7 probes. And they say, so what? And you say, well, 6 of them told me that whatever I did made people buy the product less. And they say, well, don't do that again. You say, yeah, I really learned that. Number 7 doubled the number of people who bought. And they say, my God, wonderful, do more of that. And they don't care that you did 6 things that didn't work. You did a 7th thing that did work. And so then you can build on that, and you can go further in that direction. So what I told the Perlego folks was, cut out your requirements. They had like 72-page strategy documents that went in huge detail. They'd spent months and months on them. I said, throw that away. I wasn't very popular, but that's okay. And go do a bunch of probes. And the result is now they do like 8-10 probes a week. They're learning all the time from what their customers actually want. And that's much better than, they have a 1-page document that says, we're going to try these experiments in these directions. And whatever we learn from them, we're going to do something in that direction that it tells us, either less of the bad thing or more of the good thing.
That's a great story. Also, there's product discovery is a hot topic on the summit this year. So there's quite a few sessions. David Bland, who's going to be doing the QA later today, he's talking about product discovery. Roman Pichler, who had a live session yesterday, also talked about discovery. So discovery has become quite a hot topic for us. And it makes sense, at least for those of us who have an agile background, that it would, because we knew already that we needed to do a lot of probes or experiments when it came to writing the code. And of course, the higher level concepts, like requirements, are a lot fuzzier than code will ever be. So we need that approach. But how do you help your clients, I guess I would say, trade off the desire for control versus the will to experiment? How do you get them to understand that there really is a trade-off and they need to be deliberate and conscious about that?
What a brilliant question. I didn't plant that one, Vasco. I wish I'd thought of it, because it's really good. The puzzle is, first of all, most of them are not even considering that question, and they don't even have a forum in which to do so. So what tends to happen is you get in pathological situations, which unfortunately is most of the tech organizations around, you've got the developers sort of so beaten down, you've got the product managers so subservient that they're just taking orders. I had a client that I was just doing evaluation for, and I went back to the CEO and I said, what your product managers are doing is they're just saying senior leadership tells us to do this, so we're going to execute on that. And so we're just defining the requirements in detail that we've heard from other people. There's no empowerment for us at all. We can't do any experiments, no probes, nothing's happening. And he said, well, that's not what I want. That's not what I was after. But there had been no dialogue. There'd been no discussion about how that might happen. And of course, then he had questions about how can I keep them on track, and how can I make sure they're aligned and working on the right thing. and so on, which is exactly what we've been talking about. How do you have the glide path indicator? How do you make sure there's good feedback to the folks doing the probes? But the biggest problem actually is that there isn't even a place to discuss it. So the very first thing to do is get the right folks in the room. And often I'm coaching leaders like a head of product or a head of technology or something like that. Or even more frequently, I'm coaching the head of sales or COO or the CEO, him or herself. And so I say, yeah, you have to screw up your courage and go talk to those folks over in the development department. Oh my God, they all wear Star Wars t-shirts, and I've never written any code. I can't talk to them. I'm not allowed to ask
And
questions. So I have
White
to get
Sox,
over
don't forget the White Sox.
all the white socks, the neck beards, the whole thing. So the pocket protectors. So they have to kind of get past that kind of, I can't talk to the wizards in the special tower. And once I've got them over that psychological barrier, and they have the language to discuss what was your latest probe, what did you learn, let's make sure that there's rewards for learning. And learning means, of course, trying things that don't work. So you have to stop the kind of punishment, which is often inadvertent, which comes for unsuccessful experiments. Oh, this experiment, we tried it. It was a terrible disaster. Oh, we didn't improve. We made the conversion rate worse by doing this thing. It's awful. We had to roll it back. Oh, everything's so terrible. And I say, folks, you got to celebrate that. Hurrah, we now know that giving people 2 buttons to click confuses them, and therefore they don't click as much. Hallelujah, we know we need fewer buttons. Let's write that down. Let's remember it and see what other buttons we can get rid of. And that is a successful probe, a successful experiment with a negative result. So one of the once you've got them in the room, you also have to give them the right language to talk about and the right culture to encourage more probes, more experimentation, and the learning is the value rather than getting the outcome. Of course, you want the outcome at the end, so you better make sure that you are doing it fast enough that you do try something that does work. But so long as you can reward the frequency and the learning, you are definitely going to be headed the right direction.
So have you started in your community the Squirrel Squadron? Check it out, everybody. Just Google for it or check the link below. In the Squirrel Squadron, have you started sharing some of these insights from experiments? Because there's a lot of knowledge that comes out of executing those probes and learning from what works and what doesn't.
Absolutely. Well, I'm always sharing client stories. I have people asking me about this. So, for example, I got 2 examples. So make sure I come back to the second example because it's really exciting. It's something I can exclusively reveal to your viewers here. But the one that came up last week before this other one is somebody asked me, Squirrel, we've got these 2 big decisions. We got these 2 ways to go. We're on the horns of a dilemma. We're not sure if we should do A or if we should do B. How on earth should we make the decision? And the poor guy, he had phoned my Squirrel phone. I invite people to phone my phone anytime they want and ask me questions. And he had done this. And he said, Squirrel, I'm losing sleep. The bag's under my eyes. I'm really struggling with how to approach this. And I said, do you know 2 guys named Lewis and Clark? And he said, and I was doing this then on the forum, so I was describing it. No, I don't know who Lewis and Clark are. Well, these are 2 folks who explored the interior of the United States. They went from I think it was St. Louis, I don't remember, but they went all the way over to Oregon, so across most of the middle, which was uncharted at that time. Nobody knew where the rivers were. Nobody knew where the Native Americans were, who was hostile, who wasn't, where the bears were, all that stuff. And so once we got that established and we figured out where they were, I said, have you ever heard of some place called Decision Point? And I wonder, Vasco, have you ever heard of Decision Point?
I have not.
Okay, so Decision Point is a place on the Missouri River where the river forks. And Lewis and Clark were coming along trying to explore. And these Native American tribes who were friendly to them a ways back had said, well, just follow the river. You'll get to where you're going. Your next station, your next fort is along the river. Well, they hadn't mentioned this fork. So Lewis and Clark go, well, I don't know which way we should go. They don't have GPS. They don't have cell phones. They don't have maps.
Not even the map, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They can't do anything. So what did they do? Well, what they did not do was sit down there and cogitate and think, oh boy, what should we do? Oh, let's have a requirements session. Let's, refine our, they didn't think about it. What they did is they split their party. And they sent some people down one fork, and they sent some other people down the other fork. And they said, well, you see whether you see the fort that we're trying to get to and come back quickly. This was the fast iteration that we've been talking about. So, and of course, some folks came back and said, well, it looks this way over here and that way over there. And they figured out the South Fork was the right one, and off they went. But the point is that I was telling the person who was agonizing over this decision, which way should we go? What should we do with our software? I said, do both. Go try both things, but don't do it for very long. Make sure you get rapid feedback on which one's right, and that will make it very obvious to you very quickly whether you should do this or that. And he said, wow, that's great. I'm going to go do those probes, and I'll come back quickly and tell you on the forum. So he hasn't done it yet. So check back in a week or two and see what his
Fingers
result
crossed
was.
for that
So that's
Explorer.
one. Making sense so far? I got another one, but I want to
Go for
say
it.
again.
Go for it.
Okay, so I'll go on to my other one. I just want to make sure I was making sense so far. So my other one is one I'm actually doing. So one thing I need to do is get out to the world and tell more people about all these cool things like safe to fail probes and the tilted slider and all this stuff, because not enough people know this. So I'm out there evangelizing, trying to tell everybody, but I want to learn better how to do that because I'm not a marketing expert. I know to come talk to you and I'll have a blast and lots of people will know what I'm doing, and that's great. But there's lots more I should be doing, and I want to learn about it. And no one really knows. It's like the interior of the United States in 1802. No one has mapped it. People will tell you go down this river, but they won't tell you about the fork in the road. Post on Twitter, but should I post in the morning or the afternoon? Should I post with this tag, or should I use Mastodon instead because Elon Musk is a jerk? Those things are not clear. Nobody really knows what the right way is. So I'm going to start doing this stuff in public. So I can tell you folks exclusively that starting on Monday, I'm going to start in my newsletter reporting on what my community manager, Laura, is trying out. She's doing all this, and she's working with me closely, and she's going to try one thing, and I bet that thing, whatever she tries first, that probe she tries, won't be a great success.
Maybe even the first 5.
Probably the first 5, but we're going to report on each one, and we're going to track them. We're going to experiment with, how do we track it and what does it look like? So it's not a software item; it's a marketing item. But all these things apply just as well to anything that's an unknown, anything that's in the Kinevin
and it's a great way.
quadrant.
It's a great way to overcome the problems that come with this upfront requirements engineering, right? Because we may know the direction, right? Like follow the river, but you don't know the details. The details have to be found while actually delivering the product.
And if you'd ask the Native Americans, just to keep the analogy going back to the big book of concepts, the Native Americans who gave the directions would have said, well, of course you follow the South Fork. I mean, that's obvious. We all know that. It wasn't even conscious to them, just like it's not even conscious to the finance person who says, well, obviously that number's wrong. And you got to get them to actually see it first and then get the feedback from them and then say, well, why is it wrong? How did you determine that? What process do you follow? Then you can start to understand, okay, well, all the rivers flow south because, that's the lay of the land. That's how the slopes are. And they know that, but they can't tell you. And they can't tell you. It's not that like if you ask them more politely, or if you got them in more detail, or you held both a high level and a low level mapping requirements session, you wouldn't get more information from them.
Absolutely.
What you have to do is go out and try it on the actual river.
So we have a question. Schneider asks, should a team include real users and customers in refinement or review?
A team should include real customers in everything. So give me a hard one now. Schneider, is a great question. I'm glad you asked. But the good news is that one's extremely easy. So it's vital to get actual customers because those are the ones who know what the river's like. Those are the ones who know where the bad number is. I'm glad you gave me a chance to mention something else really good. Everybody who's listening to this should read Goiko Adzic's specification by example, because it's a great early example. Now it talks about some tools and techniques that people don't use as much. I think they're still great, like things like fitness, but without worrying about the tools or exactly the code and so on. Goiko's ideas are great on exactly how you get this stuff in front of people and how you give them examples, like the spreadsheet example that I gave, that allow them to define it. Because that's the only thing that works with concepts. The only thing is to say, all right, here's a bunch of clocks. Which one is furniture? That's how you determine it. You can't do it from definitions. You can't do it from abstract principles or features or anything else.
Which one of these is furniture? I think that's
exactly.
a great question, and something we can ask our users, right?
Exactly.
Definitely.
And they'll have different answers, and that's what you want. Okay, people in the marketing department think these things, think they want a faster process through this set of steps. People in the compliance department want us to go slower. and we want to make sure we ask more questions.
So,
I'm glad we knew that. So then we can actually build maybe two steps or two processes or somehow merge them together. But we wouldn't have discovered that unless we had the actual users in the room of both kinds.
So Schneider does a follow-up, and I do want
Great.
to mention it because I think it's a great point. How do you see, and this is I think this is a little bit of a provocation, so be ready, Squirrel. How do you
Good. I
see
love
the
provocation. I'm trying to provoke all of you.
handover
If you're not angry, you're
of
not listening. Go ahead.
requirements?
Say again.
How do you see the handover of requirements? Because very often we have users somewhere out there navigating the river, and then somebody does the research and finds out how the user navigates the river. Of course, they don't, but they have a model that they then communicate to the product manager, who then explains it to the business analyst, who then transmits it or communicates it to the technical and IT product owner,
Sorry,
who
I fell
then
asleep. That sounds like a horrendous, slow, terrible process to me, but it's one that a lot of your viewers are probably locked in. So let me give you some ways out of that, some ways to wake up. So and I'll give you a case where that's really valid, where that really does happen. So and I'm sure there are similar examples elsewhere. I'm just using a one that I know that I've encountered directly, which is again in finance, where you have some individuals who are really so amazingly talented at this pick the wrong number and figure out how to do arbitrage and make money from it, that they are so valuable you cannot talk to them. I mean, they no human talks to them. They just come in the morning, they bang on the keys, they make zillions of dollars for the company, and they go home and sleep. That's all they do. So you're never going to get access to these people. You think of the people who are fantastic nuclear scientists building the safety systems for a nuclear power plant. You're probably not going to get to talk to those people. That's okay, because you have several different ways to get around this. If you're kind of stuck with these things coming into you that have come from folks you can't actually talk to. Number one, you can get proxies for them. So often there will be somebody who's not quite the august special super specialist, but who's good enough to tell you they're not going to like this. This definitely won't work. Oh yeah, and maybe go ask the august important person for the information. And so you can get proxies, and those might even be your own folks. They might be account managers, salespeople, customer service. Those folks are gold. I had one case where we had these fantastic customer service people who joined on a water billing project. So this ancient system that we were converting literally from a mainframe, right? So an ancient computer that used to be the size of this room or bigger. They had come up with all these weird workarounds for it because the code had been written in the 1970s. So these customer service people knew, and we couldn't go out to the customers. They were, 3 million people who were all getting water. But the customer service people knew that for many, many years, for example, you would mark a mobile phone in the phone record by putting 2 asterisks first. And we were trying to figure out, do you push the star key on your phone? Is this a special kind of number? You're doing, no, it's a mobile phone. Guess what? In 1970, they didn't have mobile phones. So they had come up with this code. And having those people in the room, not the actual users, not the people who were getting the bills, but the people who were on the ground, they could tell us what was going on. And they could tell us that people phoned with their mobile phones and they had to mark it. And this is how they did it. Now, that's not the only hack that you can do for this. So another thing that you can do is to make sure that you have frequent interaction, that you're getting things out often. And we would do this in finance, that we would make changes, little changes, and that we couldn't talk to the people who are actually using it, but we could watch what they were doing, and we could put in code. And, we have these wonderful tools now. Back then, we had to kind of look in the logs and put special code in JavaScript. Today, you can just plug in something like, I think it's Hotspot is the one. I might have the name wrong, but they're very user story is another one. But there are these things that'll show you what people are doing, what's hot, where are people clicking, why are they doing that, or they did this and then they did that. You can look at all that stuff. So if you can't actually get to the users for whatever reason, you can actually put something out to them, and you could put it out in a safe way. So for example, you might have the old button and the new button, and the new button says, get the report by email. And previously they had to view it online. So then you say, get the report by email. Don't put anything behind the button. When you click the button, nothing happens. This is called the painted door, right? And so you put that up and you see if people click on it. Now, some of them might phone up angry and say, by God, the report by email button doesn't work. And you say, great, could you just stay on the line for a minute? We know it's broken. We're going to fix it. But how are you going to use it once it's working again? Well, I need it by email and send it to here, and this is what it should have. And you go, oh, great, thanks very much. Now I know how you want to use this. So it's a way of getting people to come out of the shadows. So Schneider's asking us, should people be in the room? Yes, but maybe you can't get them in the room. There's lots of things you can do to work around that.
And I think that many of the ideas that you just mentioned are great examples of how you can go around the long chain of requirements communication, right? Because we can't necessarily go and talk to the users, but maybe we have somebody like a salesperson, which we can get in the room and represent what the users have told them and give this person better questions to ask that help us deliver
Exactly.
what the customers actually need. Now, Squirrel, we're getting close to the end, and I know that we've talked a lot about resources here. We talked about the Knefin framework, the big book of concepts, the Squirrel Squadron.
Don't read the big book of concepts. You don't have to. I read it for you, but you just might want to get it so you can wave it around at people, which is what I'm doing.
Yeah, just like the Bible used to be way back when. Okay, cool.
No comment. I'm not touching religion here.
But I do have a question for you, quickly
Please.
jumping off that rabbit hole. For those that want to understand better what you mean, and also, of course, many more of the workarounds and hacks that you shared with us, but more of that and thinking about it, from the product owner perspective, what would be a resource that you would recommend people going to either read or watch or listen to?
We'll give them something very easy to do. Just go to squirrelsquadron.com, and I'm sure Vasco will put that on the screen and do other good stuff. But you could also just Google for Squirrel Squadron. Luckily, there aren't kind of squadrons of squirrels roaming around the world, so we've got pretty good SEO there. So look at squirrelsquadron.com. And you can join my forum. You can get lists of resources. You can come to my events. But the easiest thing is just get my email on every Monday morning. And what I'd love to do is send any of your listeners who are interested lots of interesting ideas every Monday, which are all about how you can hack around requirements, how you can do things in a much more profitable way rather than being stuck in kind of the current situation. You can also, if you want to know more about me, look at douglassquirrel.com. Again, there aren't a lot of people named Douglas Squirrel around, so I think you'll find the right person. And that's about my consulting practice. But what I'd love for people to do as a kind of easy next step is head on over to squirrelsquadron.com and get in touch there, sign up to the squadron, get my emails, and then see if there's more stuff that you'd like to do. What I'll do for folks, by the way, is if anybody wants to do that and just put a note in as you sign up, there's a place you can say where you heard about me. If you put a note in there and say, hey, I'd like the free document, I will send you something absolutely free that I did on the glide path method, where I said landing the airplane, and you can track what you're doing, and you don't have to have sort of these endless milestones and having to have Gantt charts and so on. There's something very short and pithy I did on that, which I'd love to send to your viewers. So stick that in as you sign up for the Squirrel Squadron. I'll make sure to get that to you.
Absolutely. And the links will be in the description of the video below, squirrelsquadron.com. They're not there yet, but they'll be soon. So check
they can
it
Google
out.
Vasco. They know how to Google. I'm confident they can.
If you do Google, don't just Google squirrel, because that will not give you the right kind of squirrel.
There are lots of squirrels around. I am not the only one, but I'm the only Douglas squirrel.
Yes, or Squirrel Squadron. That works too. So be sure to add the second word there. All right, Squirrel, we're almost done. For those who got maybe even inspired to do something about how requirements are managed in their projects and in their products, what's one parting word of advice that you have for us?
I would suggest anybody in any department, no matter how far down you might be or how far at the top you might be, how distant you might be from the developers, you can do a very simple step, and that is stop using the word requirements. It's just not true, as we talked about all the way through, giant books that explain it. Doesn't work, creates greater predictability when actually you need productivity. So just stop using the word. Use a different word, train everybody to use a different word, or if you don't have the power to do that, at least stop using it yourself. Yeah, you have that. So that interesting document you have, that's a very interesting request. So let's look at that request together and let's figure out what would work for you, rather than we're going to figure out what your requirement is and do exactly what you say, boss. So I'm sowing the seeds of anarchy in your viewers and listeners, Vasco. But you can just change the language, and that will change actually the whole discussion.
And by the way, we have a podcast episode coming after summer where we discuss the impact of language on how we work and how people perceive how we should work. So pay attention to that also coming up on the podcast.
Topic close to my heart.
Sign up for squirrelsquadron.com and get Squirrel's email every Monday. I do get them, and some of them are incredibly funny as well. Not just insightful, but also funny. So
I try, but I don't get
definitely,
paid for my humor. I am not a comedian, but I do try.
definitely worth doing. All right, Squirrel, thank you very much for your generosity.